The morning of February 2020 did not begin with the usual quiet of a Wichita, Kansas suburb. Instead, 6 Kansas Bureau of Investigation (KBI) tactical vehicles roared down a narrow dirt road and screeched to a halt in front of a weathered mobile home that had been battered by years of winter winds. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, agents in bulletproof vests fanned out with hands resting near their weapons, and within seconds the property was surrounded, leaving neighbors peeking through curtains, stunned to see an action movie scene unfolding right in front of their homes. Inside, a thin woman in her 40s was preparing to leave, a small backpack already waiting by the door, as if she had always lived ready to disappear. When the bullhorn blared, "Arlena Kembry Holt, this is the KBI. Come out of the house immediately." The tiny room shook with each pounding knock. A breathless moment of silence passed. Then Arlena appeared in the doorway, trembling hands raised exactly as ordered, eyes wide with terror mixed with something else, as though she had known this day would come and had been running from it for decades. "Arlena Kembry Holt, you are being detained for questioning in connection with a disappearance that occurred in 1995. An agent cuffed her to the metallic click of figure-8 handcuffs while neighbors stood frozen, unable to comprehend why the reclusive woman next door had just become the target of a full-scale raid. They had no idea, or could never have imagined, that behind that door lay the story of a suffocating winter night when newborn twins vanished into the Kansas cold, and a truth buried for 25 years was finally about to rise. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Sedgwick County, Kansas was gripped by a suffocatingly cold winter night in early 1995. Wind howled across barren fields, whipping dust along the narrow dirt road that led to a sparsely lit rural outskirts. Temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius didn't just bite the skin, they draped the entire landscape in an eerie silence so complete you could almost hear the wooden door frames rattle in the gusts. At the end of that road, the Holt family home cast a faint yellow glow, not nearly enough to push back the thick darkness cloaking the quiet countryside. Just before midnight, a few neighbors still awake caught sight of 21-year-old Arlena Kembry Holt, her face always carrying a trace of exhaustion, hurrying out of the house. In her arms were 2 newborns, the twins Aloan and Marin, wrapped in a thin blanket. Arlena moved with frantic urgency, as if fleeing something yet heading toward somewhere predetermined. In the darkness no one could tell where she was going, or why she had left at that hour. They only saw her clutching the babies tightly to her chest, head bowed against the wind, walking quickly down the gust-battered dirt road. One neighbor on his porch briefly considered calling out, but then his house lights went dark, and Arlena's silhouette melted into the night. The howling wind kept whipping through old fences, swallowing even the sound of footsteps, making everything feel fragile and elusive. After that moment, no one saw Arlena or the babies again. The night dragged on heavily. Inside the Holt home, the phone rang repeatedly with no answer. Joelle Kembry, Arlena's mother, kept calling, her voice trembling with a growing sense that something was wrong. By the time the sky began to lighten, the door remained shut, the bedroom empty, and there was no sign Arlena had returned. Her car was still there, clothes untouched, belongings undisturbed, everything frozen from the instant she walked out. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees and fell on a dirt road now bearing only windswept traces. The Holt family spilled outside, shouting Arlena's name until their voices cracked, but silence was the only reply. No fresh footprints, no baby cries, no sound of life at all, only the razor-sharp cold still enveloping everything, as if it had swallowed every movement from the night before. When the clock passed 7 a.m. with still no sign of Arlena or the twins Aloan and Marin, panic in the family reached a point where waiting was no longer possible. Trembling, Joelle dialed 911. At the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, the duty phone rang in the icy morning air. The on-duty deputy, still warmed by a fresh cup of coffee, answered in his usual steady tone. But seconds after the caller began speaking, his face fell. A woman's trembling, broken voice mixed with gasping breaths. "My daughter, Arlena, and my 2 newborn grandbabies, they never came home all night. No one can find them." The deputy sat bolt upright and signaled a colleague to write down every detail. The panic in Joelle Kembry's voice was unmistakable, the kind that can't be faked and can't be delayed. Less than 5 minutes later, the information reached the sheriff and the rapid response team. A missing young mother and 2 newborn infants in sub-zero weather was enough to trigger the highest priority level. Within minutes, the first patrol car peeled out of the station and raced toward Arlena's home. When police arrived, the Holt family was clustered on the porch, faces gaunt, eyes red from a sleepless night. The front door stood wide open, evidence they had already searched every inch inside, with no sign of Arlena's return. The deputy took quick statements. Arlena had left the night before carrying both babies, Aloan and Marin, without telling anyone anything. Her phone had been unreachable for hours. No one knew where she was going, or why she left in such deadly cold. The search team began sweeping the area around the house. They didn't have to look far to spot chaotic footprints leading from the entrance down the dirt road. One deputy crouched to examine them. The prints were uneven, with occasional long skids, exactly what you'd expect from someone carrying 2 infants, weak and hurrying over slick ground. They followed the trail away from the property toward the southern field. Near a sharp bend, the soil was softer, and the prints more jumbled, as if Arlena had stopped or turned several times. There, something small caught their eye, a thin infant blanket, caked in mud and crusted with frozen dew. A deputy picked it up, immediately bagged it as evidence, and noted it matched the family's description. A few meters farther, another discovery silenced the team. Tiny specks of blood mixed into the mud, very small but unmistakably human. One deputy knelt and shone a flashlight close. 1 drop. Fresh, in the knife-like cold and damp earth, this meant someone had been scratched, or was weakening, as they passed through. Right there, the first trace of a vehicle appeared, fresh tire tracks, the soil compressed with a clear pickup truck tread pattern. The tracks formed a half-arc, then headed toward the main road. The deputy marked the area, photographed the scene, and noted, "Vehicle stopped here briefly, possibly to pick someone up or make contact." The search expanded deeper into the field. The sheriff deployed parallel efforts, one team following footprints, another combing the area where items were dropped, a third canvassing neighbors. They knocked on every nearby door, hoping someone had seen or heard anything unusual overnight. And someone had. An elderly man said that around midnight, he heard a baby crying through his window, but thought it was just a cat. Another neighbor, Nina Skeller, said that while tending her chickens, she saw a figure sprint across an open patch fast enough that she couldn't tell if it was male or female. Just a running shadow, then gone, she recalled. These scattered accounts began piecing together a rough timeline. Arlena left the house in the freezing night, carrying both babies. She walked the dirt road toward the field. A baby was heard crying, a running figure was seen, and a black pickup appeared at the scene. As morning rose higher, the sheriff ordered a wider search radius, stretching to a dry creek bed and field trails. Deputies called Arlena's and the baby's names in groups, voices echoing in the cold wind. Time sliced through the air like a blade. In these temperatures, the twins' survival window was measured in minutes. The first day's search ended with a grim conclusion. Arlena was no longer anywhere near the house, and neither were the babies. The clues left behind were sparse and fragmented, and the presence of the black pickup meant this was no longer simply a panicked mother walking away. A formal investigation began, and Sedgwick County realized they were facing something potentially far more serious than anyone had first imagined. The search continued outward from the tire tracks, and less than an hour later, a deputy in the eastern group suddenly shouted over the radio, his voice catching at what lay before him. The rest of the team rushed to the marked spot, pushing through dew-soaked weeds and uneven, muddy ground still slow to thaw from the night frost. And there, In a natural depression among the rough terrain, they found the body of a newborn loosely wrapped in a blanket, now darkened by cold and moisture. It was Arlena Holt. That moment stopped the entire team for several seconds, as if the cold itself had frozen them in place. The tiny body lay curled tight, arms pressed to its chest, face ashen, lips purple. There were no signs of violence, no trauma, no bruises, only the unmistakable evidence of severe hypothermia. The blanket was so loose, it barely covered anything, and the location suggested the baby had been placed there in a desperate attempt at shelter, or simply because whoever carried her could go no farther. A deputy sighed and bent to examine the surroundings. No signs of a struggle, no disturbance. That only confirmed Arlena had not been attacked. She had been claimed by the brutal Kansas cold. The sheriff ordered the area sealed immediately. A tarp was thrown up to shield the weak morning sun that could still alter the scene. Forensic officers were called in to document every detail: ground temperature, wind direction, soil compression around the body, distance from where the footprints ended. Everything was flagged, photographed, and measured meticulously. Finding Maren, infant B, instantly became the most urgent priority. If Arlena had died from exposure after just hours outside, any hope for Maren was now measured in minutes. The fact that only one baby had been found made the situation even more alarming. Either Maren had been taken by someone, or she was still somewhere in the area hidden by tall grass or rocks. Nearby deputies began calling Maren's name, even though they knew a hours-old infant couldn't answer. In desperation, they refused to leave any chance untried. The sheriff ordered the search radius expanded another 300 meters in every direction, teams sweeping in a grid pattern. While the scene was processed, investigators returned to gather more neighbor statements. That was when the first critical piece of nighttime sound evidence was confirmed. The elderly man living about 200 meters from the discovery site repeated that he had heard a baby crying near midnight. He admitted that because the wind was hammering his tin roof so hard, he assumed it was a cat or wild animal. I never thought it was a real baby," he said, his voice heavy with shock. Had he known, he added, he would have turned on the lights and gone outside. That statement lined up perfectly with the location of Arlena's body and the estimated time of death, based on her body temperature. It helped police reconstruct a small portion of Arlena's path and the moment the baby was set down. But more importantly, if Arlena was found here, and Maren was not, something had changed after the man heard crying. Someone may have arrived in the night, or Arlena tried in panic to go back for something, or Maren had been carried away by another person. All three possibilities were terrifying in their own way. Police kept combing the scene for any trace of Maren. One deputy spotted an unfamiliar shoe print about 10 meters from the body. Though faint, it clearly did not belong to Arlena or any officer, and it was significantly larger. This was reported instantly. The sheriff ordered a new perimeter and a tighter focus on the suspicious area. The frozen ground made direction hard to determine, but the mere presence of an adult-sized print from someone else near the time of Arlena's death was chilling evidence that another person had been there. The Holt family was kept far from the scene, but news that Arlena's body had been found reached them within minutes. Arlena Kembry collapsed in her husband's arms, sobs swallowed by the cold wind. Yet the sheriff had to keep information strictly limited. This was an active investigation, and every reaction, every word had to be controlled. All they told the family was that one of the babies had been located, and they were doing everything possible to find the other. Still, everyone understood the pain was unimaginable. Losing one child is irreparable, but having the second still missing stretched every emotion to the breaking point. The sheriff returned to the scene and stood beside Arlena's tiny body. He scanned the cold, empty field stretching before him. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It had crossed into something dangerous, complex, and unpredictable. What haunted him most was if Aloan had been left here in desperation, what had happened to Marin? Who took her, and why? In the thick silence of the winter morning, the investigation team carried on. No one spoke, but everyone understood that what happened the night before was anything but simple. Finding Aloan's body was not the end, it was only the beginning of a case growing darker and more mysterious by the minute. Marin was still out there somewhere, and her disappearance opened an entirely different chapter, forcing everyone to accept that this was not just tragedy. It was a crime that might run far deeper than anything visible on this frozen ground. As soon as Aloan Holt's body was removed from the scene, the Sedgwick County coroner's van immediately transported the infant to the forensic facility in Wichita for autopsy. The cold still clung to the thin blanket wrapped around the tiny body, making everyone in the room feel a heaviness mixed with urgency. No one spoke loudly. They all understood that every minute mattered. Determining Aloan's cause of death could be the key to figuring out what had happened to Marin. Dr. Leanne Price, a veteran forensic pathologist with years of experience handling infant deaths, was assigned to perform the autopsy. She was known for being meticulously thorough, rarely missing even the smallest detail, and in this case, she knew those small details might tell the entire story. From the moment the body was placed on the cold steel table, the air in the room grew thick, equipment was switched on, cameras rolled continuously, and Dr. Price began her process. She first conducted an overall external examination of Aloan. No bruises, no signs of external force, no trauma to the head, chest, or bones. These findings matched the initial observations at the scene, but what drew her attention most was the condition of the body, particularly the pallid white skin, the deep purple lips, and the mottled discoloration from cold on the hands and feet. Everything pointed to one thing: acute hypothermia. Determining the cause of death did not take long. The signs on the body, combined with the weather conditions that night, and the location where the body was found, quickly led Dr. Price to conclude Aloan had died of hypothermia, severe hypothermia after hours of exposure to sub-freezing outdoor conditions. But the critical findings came next. When Dr. Price removed Aloan's diaper for a thorough examination, she suddenly paused. On the fabric along the edge of the diaper, she discovered a dark reddish-brown streak, still intact enough to be recognizable: adult blood. A small amount, but too obvious to overlook. The sample was immediately cut out, placed in an evidence bag, and sent to the DNA lab. She continued examining the infant's abdomen and back. There, another crucial detail emerged. Tiny dried particles of soil still clung to the skin in minute specks. The soil was identical to that at the scene, but what caught her attention was how it adhered to the skin, especially beneath the blanket. This indicated the body had been placed on the ground, and then wrapped afterward, meaning the body had been moved after death. This was an extremely significant discovery. If the infant had simply been left on the ground, the soil would have adhered directly to the skin. But in this case, the soil was in positions inconsistent with the body's final resting posture. That meant someone had lifted Aloan and placed her somewhere else. The report documented every detail. It was impossible to determine who had moved the body, Arlena, or someone else. But this single finding was enough to push the case beyond the scope of a weather-related accident and into the realm of human intervention. Another point that troubled Dr. Price was the clear evidence that Aloan had been born outdoors. The dryness of the umbilical cord, the residual vernix on the skin, and the distinctive way the tiny soil particles reacted with the remaining birth fluids all indicated the infant had been born only hours before death. There were no traces of an indoor birth, no fibers, no household dust on the skin, only soil and frost. This confirmed the theory that Arlena had given birth to both babies right there in the field, or nearby, under extremely dangerous conditions. Dr. Price paused for a few seconds before signing the preliminary section of the autopsy report. Though she was accustomed to standing in the middle of tragedies and seeing things that were hard to accept, the smallness of Aloan, and the circumstances she had faced in her very first hours of life, weighed heavily on her heart. After completing the soft tissue analysis, she moved on to related evidence. The adult blood on the diaper was confirmed not to belong to Arlena. This was a turning point. If it was Arlena's blood, it would fit with an outdoor birth under panicked conditions. But if it was not Arlena's, it meant another adult had direct contact with the infant very close to the time of death. A few hours later, preliminary lab results came back. The blood sample did not match Arlena's DNA, and could not be matched to any profile currently in the system. That meant the blood belonged to an unidentified adult. This person was present at or immediately after the birth. This person may have been the one who moved the body. This person could also be the one who carried Marin away from the scene. Dr. Price's initial conclusions were quickly forwarded to the sheriff. The short but heavy report read, "Death due to hypothermia, no evidence of violence. Evidence of outdoor birth, body was moved. Unidentified adult DNA detected." When the Sedgwick County Sheriff read the report, he remained silent. Arlena had not died due to malicious intent, but someone else, an adult other than Arlena, had been there. And considering that Marin had never been found in the area, this discovery abruptly shifted the case from a natural tragedy to one involving active human intervention. A new investigation opened, not just to understand what had happened to Arlena and Arlena, but more importantly, to find out where Marin was, and who had taken the child from that dark Kansas field that night. Just as Dr. Leanne Price's autopsy report reached the scene, the search team made another critical discovery that strongly reinforced the conclusion that Arlena and Marin had been born outdoors. While expanding the search westward, a deputy called out and requested the area around a partially collapsed old dirt depression be sealed off. The ground there was sunken, and the surface still showed dark streaks mixed into the soft mud. The sheriff arrived immediately and crouched to examine the marked area. It was a mixture of bodily fluids, blood, and the distinctive thick tissue of a placenta. A portion of the placenta remained disturbingly intact, a direct sign that delivery had occurred right there. Forensic technicians quickly collected samples, sealed them in bags, and continued expanding the search circle around the depression. Within minutes, deputies found additional thin blood trails extending toward the dirt road, consistent with the previously identified chaotic footprints. These were not signs of an attack or struggle, no scuffle patterns, no drag marks, no evidence of a fight. Instead, the entire scene pointed to something else. Arlena had given birth right here, unexpectedly, unprepared, in brutal weather. The sheriff observed closely, then said in a low voice, "Born right here, in the middle of a night this cold. This isn't violence, this is birth and desperation." Based on Dr. Price's forensic conclusions and the evidence at the scene, investigators quickly determined that Arlena had not been attacked prior to delivery. There were no signs of coercion, injury, or pursuit. This gradually eliminated the initial kidnapping theory. No attacker had appeared before Arlena gave birth to the twins. So what had happened? Investigators concluded that Arlena had gone into sudden labor while outdoors, possibly in a state of panic or trying to find shelter. The weather that night was too cold, with strong winds, making delivery extremely dangerous. The fresh blood and fluids proved the birth had taken place in this depression. There was no mistaking it. Another detail the sheriff found particularly striking: the placenta had been left completely exposed, with no signs of being handled or covered. This was consistent with an unplanned, uncontrolled birth, and highly likely that Arlena had no assistance whatsoever. The fact that Arlena had delivered twins at the scene was further confirmed when Dr. Price compared the collected placenta with the residual fluids on Arlena's body. Everything matched a twin delivery. This shifted the case into an entirely different phase. Marin Holt, infant B, remained missing. The sheriff ordered all files updated immediately. This was no longer a standard missing person case. It was now the disappearance of a newborn delivered outdoors at the scene, under weather conditions that could kill within hours. If Marin had survived leaving this location, someone had to have carried her away. And that person, the one who took Marin from the scene, was the most critical link the investigation needed to find. All records were expanded at once. The infant's name was officially entered into the system: Marin Holt, infant B, newborn missing. After outdoor birth information was hurriedly prepared and sent to regional hospitals to check whether anyone had brought in a newborn for emergency care that night or early morning. At the same time, the sheriff ordered a canvass of all residences within a 5-mile radius of the scene, especially those with lights on unusually late or vehicles leaving at odd hours. In the temporary command center set up near the Holt home, the scene diagram was spread across the table: the delivery site, locations of dropped items, the pickup tire tracks, Arlena's footprints, Eloan's body location. But on that diagram, the point that worried everyone most was the unaccounted-for blank space, the location of Marin. Based on all evidence, investigators agreed on 3 possibilities. Marin was found and taken by someone with good intentions who has not yet reported it. Marin was taken by someone who happened to be there but has not come forward. Marin was taken by someone connected to Arlena, a relative or acquaintance, but no family member admits to knowing anything. The sheriff knew these 3 possibilities carried very different investigative implications, especially the third, because if true, the silence of whoever took Marin would become a complicated issue moving forward. Meanwhile, the Holt family was nearly collapsing, but the sheriff had to keep the investigation focused. This was not the time for emotion to override facts. The only truth they knew at that moment was Arlena had delivered twins, Eloan was dead, and Marin had completely vanished. The case was no longer just a search for a missing person. It had become the hunt for a newborn separated from her mother on a cold, rainy Kansas night, with only one remaining link between them and the truth: the person who carried Marin away. From the moment tire tracks appeared near Arlena's delivery site, the Sedgwick County Sheriff considered them the most important clue for tracing any adult who had been present at the scene that night. In a rural area like Sedgwick County, black pickup trucks were common, but the tire tread pattern imprinted in the soil was distinctive: large off-road tires typically used for heavy work. Within hours, investigators narrowed down a short list of owners with matching tires, and the most prominent name on that list was Jonas Recker. Jonas was a man who lived about 3 miles from the scene, worked repairing farm equipment, and was known for being quiet and moody. Even more notable was that neighbors confirmed his black pickup often left the house at night, for reasons no one knew. That was enough for the sheriff to send deputies to his door immediately. When investigators knocked that same afternoon, Jonas appeared surprised but let them in, though his face clearly showed irritation. The black pickup was parked in the yard, still damp with dew. Deputies requested to examine the vehicle as part of the investigation, and Jonas agreed, albeit reluctantly. The forensic team quickly checked the body, tires and undercarriage for comparison with scene evidence. Within minutes, a deputy whispered to the sheriff, "Tires are a very close match. Tread pattern is 90% identical." That was enough to bring Jonas in for formal questioning. In the temporary interview room at the sheriff's office, Jonas sat with arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. When asked where he had been the night Arlena disappeared, Jonas said he was driving to the main road to visit a friend up north. When asked for the friend's name, he said he couldn't remember. When asked why he was driving at night in that weather, he said he wasn't sure, answers that only heightened suspicion. The sheriff asked him to recount his exact route. Jonas claimed he only went a short distance before turning around. But when deputies checked the odometer, the mileage did not match his story. Suspicion grew. Jonas's statements became increasingly inconsistent. He said he left home at 10 p.m., but neighbors heard his truck start closer to 11 p.m. He said he never turned onto the southern dirt roads, yet fresh crumpled tracks very similar to his tires appeared nearby. When asked if he had seen anyone on the dirt road, he said no, but his eyes darted away in a way that suggested he was hiding something. With these contradictions, Jonas became the first potential suspect. Investigators took a DNA sample under standard procedure and impounded the pickup to test for blood or biological traces. Soil stuck to the undercarriage was also compared to scene samples, hoping to prove Jonas had been in the area the night the pregnant woman gave birth. However, just hours later, preliminary lab reports began revealing a different truth. There were no traces of blood, fibers or biological material on Jonas's truck linked to Arlena, Eloan, or any newborn. The soil under the wheels matched many areas around town, not specific enough to place the truck at the exact placenta discovery site. Most importantly, Jonas's DNA did not match the unidentified adult DNA found on Eloan's diaper. A deputy sighed while reading the report. No match. Nothing to charge him with. The sheriff frowned. Every inconsistency in Jonas's story made him look guilty, but the forensic evidence completely ruled out direct involvement in Eloan's death or Marin's disappearance. When Jonas was brought back in to hear the results, his expression shifted from tense to angry. "I told you, I don't know anything about it," he growled, though his voice did not sound entirely like that of an innocent man. Jonas remained on file for inconsistent statements, but investigators could not hold him further. The sheriff had to admit that Jonas Recker was not the person they were looking for. The black pickup, despite appearing at the right time and close to the right place, turned out to be an unfortunate coincidence. This was the investigation's first misdirection, a classic red herring that cost the team nearly a full day before returning to square one. As Jonas left the sheriff's office looking irritated, investigators returned to the scene diagram and drew a red line through the words, "Suspect #1, Jonas Recker." But that also meant the person who took Marin remained completely unknown. The sheriff stood in front of the diagram, staring at the sketch of the depression where Arlena had given birth, and the spot where Eloan's body was found. He knew they were not far from the truth, but not close enough to touch it. One lead had been eliminated, but the biggest question still hung in the air over the frozen Kansas fields. If it wasn't Jonas, then who had been there that night? And where was Marin? Jonas Recker, being cleared as a suspect, left Sheriff Sedgwick County feeling the hole in the case had just grown a little wider, as if the truth was deliberately burrowing deeper into the thick fog of that night. Still, the investigation could not stop. When the team went back to canvass the fields and the dirt road for more information, a new name began surfacing in the whispers of a few locals: Carissa Duvall. Carissa lived a few miles west of the scene, in an old log house set back among the trees. What put her on the radar was a neighbor who insisted he had seen the silhouette of a petite woman walking along the dirt road the night Arlena disappeared. He wasn't 100% sure, but in that area, aside from Arlena herself, the only woman with a similar build was Carissa. Investigators immediately added her to the list for questioning. They knew that in cases involving newborns, the sudden appearance of any young woman near the scene could not be ignored, especially when Carissa's own background was complicated. A few years earlier, she had secretly given birth and then abandoned the baby at the hospital shortly after delivery. No one knew why, and Carissa never spoke of it. The story had become local gossip in the small tight-knit community, forever linking her name to mysteries involving infants. When the deputy knocked, Carissa answered the door looking exhausted, hair messy, eyes ringed with dark circles. She seemed confused when asked where she had been the previous night, but she showed none of the panic or evasion Jonas had displayed. The sheriff noticed this and asked her to be specific. "I was home last night," Carissa said slowly. "I didn't go anywhere. I was sick." The answer sounded simple, but it wasn't enough. The deputy pressed, "Can anyone confirm that?" Carissa paused for a few seconds, then pointed inside the house. "My mother. She was with me all night." That gave the team pause, a direct family witness, but they needed more. The sheriff ordered a quick sweep of the house for any sign someone had been out in the cold, wet shoes, dew-soaked clothes, fresh mud. There was nothing. The shoes by the door were bone dry, no mud matching the crime scene soil. The back door showed no sign of being opened the previous night. The team moved on to Carissa's mother. She confirmed, Carissa had a fever from the evening on. I stayed up watching over her almost the whole night. She never left her room. The statement was cross-checked with a simple but effective detail. Carissa had an electric blanket, and the outlet in her room was still warm, showing it had been on all night. Clinic records also showed she had been treated 2 days earlier for a severe cold. Everything lined up. Still, for thoroughness, the sheriff requested a DNA sample from Carissa, standard procedure in infant cases. She agreed instantly, without hesitation. The sample was rushed to the lab to be compared with the unidentified adult blood found on Elowen's diaper. Results came back within hours. No match, no relation. It wasn't Carissa. One deputy looked at the board, shook his head slightly. Another red herring. The sheriff sighed. Every initial detail that made Carissa look suspicious, the sighting near the area, her secret birth history, the community rumors, collapsed the moment it was tested against hard forensic evidence. The team had no choice but to cross her name off the suspect list. No evidence placed her at the scene, no DNA match, no window of time to leave the house, no actual connection to Marin's disappearance or Elowen's death. Worse, chasing this lead had cost them another full day, and with a missing newborn, every day erased what little chance of survival remained. The second day of the investigation ended in heavy disappointment. Both main leads, Jonas and Carissa, had led nowhere. The 2 adult figures they had hoped would unlock the case turned out to be nothing more than cruel coincidences. In the sheriff's temporary war room, yellow light fell across an increasingly crowded evidence board, filled with notes, arrows, and red marks. But at its center, the boldly circled line remained unchanged. Marin Holt, Infant B, still missing. The sheriff stood there a long time, saying nothing. No one in the room spoke. They all understood the case was sliding into a dead end, and the truth about the night Arlena gave birth to twins in that Kansas field was slipping further out of reach than ever. Leads were drying up, yet the most important question remained unanswered. Who took Marin, and why? Clearing Carissa Duval dropped the case into a terrifying silence, one that lasted far longer than anyone predicted. When the third day of investigation closed without a single new viable lead, the Sedgwick County Sheriff was forced to admit a painful reality. They had run out of directions. Every initial trace, the chaotic footprints, tire tracks, strange blood, scattered belongings, failed to identify who had taken Marin. No one came forward, no abandoned infant was reported, no one had seen Arlena after the night she left home. In the weeks that followed, the search continued but produced nothing. The vast fields were torn apart by dozens of rescue teams and cadaver dogs, yet no sign of Marin Holt. Arlena left no trail either, no body, no identification reports, no bank transactions, no hospital records. She vanished as if erased from the map. Months later, the file was transferred to state level and officially handed over to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation (KBI). A new team was formed to keep working the case, but from that point on, the story gradually slipped away from Sedgwick County's hands. The first KBI agent, Special Agent Harrison Cole, reviewed the file, but his conclusion only echoed what the sheriff already knew. No clear criminal indicators, yet no evidence it was merely an accident. Everything sat in a dangerous gray zone, where conflicting theories fought over almost zero data. Cole searched for any trace of Arlena through paperwork, hospital records, Social Security activity. Nothing appeared after 1995. Arlena had evaporated. Marin Holt was even more hopeless. No hospital in the state recorded an unidentified female infant that night. No resident reported finding an abandoned baby. No cameras, no passers-by, no reports of unusual sounds, nothing but emptiness. The first year passed without a single new piece of information. KBI rotated personnel. The second lead agent, Agent Carter Doyle, expanded the search radius, and even ordered redigging of old suspected burial spots in case Marin had been concealed underground or left in the wilderness. Again, nothing but dirt, rock and overgrown grass. The more investigators rotated through the lead role, the stiffer the case became. Files grew thicker, notes piled on notes, but the core information never changed. Alowan died of exposure, Marin vanished, Arlena's fate unknown. The mystery adult never materialized. By year 10, the case was downgraded to non-priority, reviewed only when new technology or public tips surfaced. No one called. The community slowly accepted that Arlena and Marin probably hadn't survived that night, even without proof. Rumors swirled. Some said Arlena was abducted, others that she was running from family. Still others believed she panicked and got lost in the woods. Every rumor only clouded the truth further. The Holt family was not spared time's destruction. Arlena Kembry Holt never stopped hoping to find her daughter, but the years wore down her health and spirit. Derek Holt Sr. retreated into silence, dodging every question about the night Arlena disappeared. Cassian Holt, Arlena's brother, was hit hardest. He left Kansas just months after the incident, moving first to Oklahoma, then Colorado, fleeing the stares. The less he appeared, the more people suspected him, yet there was never any evidence. By year 25, Marin Holt's file carried only a cold single line in the KBI system: missing, unresolved, presumed deceased. The case had officially become a true cold case, one where time had cooled every lead. Everyone involved had aged or moved away. Paper records yellowed. Physical evidence sat motionless in storage, forgotten among hundreds of others. And for all 25 of those years, no one knew that the tiny samples from that winter night in 1995, the blood-stained diaper, a few hairs, patches of fluid on fabric, were still there, waiting for technology strong enough to answer the question the Sedgwick County Sheriff once asked in desperation: who took Marin, and where did Arlena go that night? After Marin Holt's file entered its 25th year without progress, the KBI launched a large-scale cold case review, and the disappearance of Arlena and the twins was placed in the priority group because of its unusual nature. It was during this review that KBI forensic experts reopened the old evidence, sealed bags that had sat undisturbed in cold storage since 1995, to understand why the investigation had failed from the very first days. The evidence boxes were brought to the lab table: Alowan's diaper, pieces of blanket, soil samples, placental tissue, a small dried blood smear, several short unidentified hairs. At a glance, everything looked tiny and insignificant, yet each item was a fragment of a story that had never been fully assembled. When the team began re-examining the 1995 DNA reports, the truth became clearer than ever. The technology available at the time was simply too weak to handle contaminated samples, especially the complex biological mixtures collected the night Arlena gave birth. Old reports showed most samples were contaminated with soil, dew, placental tissue, and blood from multiple sources. The sequencing machines of that era could only read clean single-source DNA, and these samples were the exact opposite. Many items were marked inconclusive, insufficient quality, or unable to interpret. A young forensic scientist on the team remarked, what they had in 1995 was practically unworkable by today's standards. It wasn't that they did anything wrong, it was that the technology simply wasn't there yet. KBI continued re-examining each item. Some soil samples had retained their original structure thanks to proper freezing, but fluid and blood samples had degraded badly over time, making standard reanalysis nearly impossible. Still, among the few things left usable, one sample always stood out: the adult blood found on Alowan's diaper during autopsy. In 1995, the lab could not determine whose blood it was. It didn't match Alowan, didn't match anything else collected, and was never compared to Arlena's DNA, because mandatory maternal sampling in such cases didn't exist yet. So the blood became a huge unknown from the start, but no one had the tools to solve it. When the current team reviewed the old notes, they understood why critical clues were missed. It wasn't just limited technology. Analyzing mixed DNA from multiple contributors was practically impossible back then. Blood mixed with fluid, soil, and environmental organic matter made separation far too difficult. 1995 machines couldn't isolate individual DNA sources, and the final result was nothing but chaotic, unreadable signals. A technician flipped through the old log and pointed to a rare handwritten note, unidentified DNA source, unable to match. That was all the 1995 lab could say. But to the modern team, that note meant something entirely different. It was the trace of a third adult present at the scene very close to the moment Elowen died, or possibly while Arlena was still in labor. That single revelation made the case far more complex. If that person took Marin, why were there no other traces? Who were they? Why did they appear at exactly that moment? And why had they never surfaced in 25 years? In the next meeting, the lead forensic scientist stated plainly, the case didn't fail because of lack of effort. It failed because of lack of technology. The remaining evidence had been stored correctly, which inadvertently became the only real chance for a future breakthrough. Though most samples were too degraded, that strange blood sample still held enough integrity to offer hope. Hope that modern methods could finally read the answer no one could reach 25 years ago. The team left the briefing room with a feeling that was both brutal and faintly hopeful. Even though the case had been ice cold for 2 decades, one thing was now clearer than ever. Arlena was not alone in that field that night. Someone else was there, and that person has never been identified. Immediately after the forensic team confirmed that the adult blood sample on Elowen's diaper still held enough value for modern analysis, the KBI made the most important decision since the case began. Send the entire unknown DNA sample to Parabon Nanolabs, the leading U.S. lab in genetic genealogy for cold cases. This was an option that simply did not exist in 1995, but by 2020, it had become the only real hope of breaking the deadlock in the case of the twins abandoned in the freezing Kansas night. At Parabon, the DNA was handed to mixed DNA specialist Ava Caro, a name well known in forensic circles for her ability to untangle extremely complex mixtures. When Ava received the evidence box, it contained only a small piece of diaper, a few dried mud stains, and a chaotic jumble of DNA that any traditional lab would have labeled unworkable. For Ava, though, this was exactly the kind of puzzle she thrived on, scattered fragments of lives that had never been given a voice. The first step was cleaning the sample and full sequencing. The gene sequencer produced millions of DNA fragments, but more importantly, it opened the door to separating individual DNA profiles that had been layered on top of each other for 25 years. The work stretched across weeks as Ava and her team used specialized algorithms to untangle each layer. Then the first breakthrough came. The genetic structure revealed 2 distinct sources of DNA mixed in the same sample. Source 1, the DNA of infant A, Arlena Holt, a perfect match with the old records. Source 2, adult female DNA, young with genetic markers consistent with a woman aged 1925 at the time of birth, exactly matching Arlena's age range. This confirmed 2 crucial points: that no one had been able to prove 25 years earlier. Arlena had indeed given birth to both babies outdoors at the scene. She had direct postpartum contact with Elowen, leaving blood and epithelial cells on the diaper. But what excited KBI most was not simply confirming the mother. The far bigger news was this: that adult DNA sample was of high enough quality to be used for genetic genealogy. Ava Caro uploaded the clean genetic data to GED Match, the open-source DNA database used for criminal investigations. She searched for individuals sharing large DNA segments, focusing on regions typical of second- and third-degree relatives. At first there were only distant matches, mostly individuals from 2 or 3 different Midwestern families. But when Ava combined the hits, a pattern emerged: The majority of matches traced back to distant branches of one old established Kansas clan, the Kembry family. She opened a genealogy chart, marked every related person, and built a family tree stretching back more than a century. As the branches began to intersect, Ava narrowed it down to 3 closely connected Kembry lines in Sedgwick County. She called KBI, "We have 3rd and 4th degree relatives of the children's mother." This profile points to a family cluster around Wichita, Sedgwick County. The mother of the twins is definitely from the Kembry line. For the first time in 25 years, the identity of the woman from that frigid 1995 night was no longer a complete unknown. Forensic science had gone farther than anything the previous generation of detectives had achieved. Instead of an unnamed mother giving birth in the dark, they now had a specific family origin and a relative network strong enough to lead to a real name. KBI immediately convened an emergency meeting. Veteran investigators who had worked the original 1995 case sat around the table, still carrying the weight of those blizzard search nights. When the name Kembry was mentioned, several froze. It was a familiar surname, one that had popped up multiple times in the Sedgwick County area back then. But previously, no one had any basis to connect any individual to the twin birth. This time was different. The genealogy produced a short list of women with matching genetics, born roughly 1973, 1976, meaning 1922 years old in 1995. And on that short list, only one had ever lived less than 4 miles from the dirt road where Arlena disappeared. KBI circled the name, Arlena Kembry Holt. They had the mother's identity, and if they could find the mother, they might finally learn what happened to Marin. The genetic genealogy breakthrough did not simply reopen the case, it sent the story in an entirely new direction, opening the first real door to a truth that had been buried for a quarter century. When Ava Caro sent the detailed genealogy report to KBI, the investigative team immediately began cross-referencing family branches to identify the closest relatives of the mother's DNA sample. The short list was down to slightly more than 10 individuals, but 2 names kept appearing at the 2nd degree level, close enough for positive identification: Joel Kembry and Derek Holt Sr. Both were longtime Sedgwick County residents, who had lived near the area where Arlena was last seen in 1995. When KBI entered all the data into genealogy software, the relationship map became crystal clear. Joelle was the biological mother of a woman whose DNA perfectly matched the mother sample from Elena's diaper, while Derek Holt Sr. showed the corresponding match as that woman's biological father. There was only one possible conclusion: Arlena Kembry Holt was the mother who gave birth to twins Aloan and Marin on that winter night in 1995. KBI went back to civil records. Arlena was born in 1974, exactly the age genetic analysis had predicted. She had lived in the same area where infant A's body was found, and had been documented leaving home that night, never to return. One investigator flipped through the 1995 reports and said quietly, "We were standing right next to the mother's identity for 25 years and never knew it." But a major paradox now arose: no one had had any contact with Arlena since the day she vanished. Police records, hospital records, travel records, everything stopped abruptly after February 1995, the same month the twins appeared in the freezing field. No death certificate, no long-term missing person file, no communication trace. Complete blank. KBI began searching federal databases for signs Arlena had left Kansas, but there was no record of her using her social security number anywhere after that year. When a young person disappears without a trace, experience in cold cases points to only 2 realistic possibilities: death or a deliberate identity change. The second is far harder to detect. A KBI data analyst suggested checking every application for new ID or legal name change in the 10 years after 1995, focusing on neighboring states. More than 2 weeks later, a record surfaced in Missouri. A woman named Arlena K. Lorne, born 1974, with birthplace listed as unknown, who applied for a new ID at the end of 1996. It proved nothing on its own, but the fingerprints in that file, though faded and incomplete, produced a high probability match with Arlena's juvenile fingerprint record in the Kansas system. Suspicion now became direction. Arlena had not died that winter night in 1995. She had left Kansas and lived under a new identity, cutting all ties with her family. This completely overturned the 25-year assumption that she might have died at the same time as Marin. KBI first contacted Joelle Kembry. She said the family assumed Arlena had run away due to postpartum crisis, but no one knew if she was even alive. And the most painful part, there had never been any information about Marin. In the emergency meeting summary, KBI concluded, Arlena gave birth to twins outdoors. Aloan died of exposure. Marin vanished without a trace. Arlena survived that night, left Kansas, and changed her identity. It is unknown whether Marin left with Arlena or was taken by someone else. What began in 1995 as a seemingly straightforward case suddenly turned into a labyrinth of buried secrets. With confirmation that Arlena was alive and had once changed her name, KBI understood the investigation was no longer just about finding the children's mother. For the first time they had a real chance to discover the fate of Marin Holt, the twin who disappeared from that frozen field more than 2 decades ago. And to do that, they had to find Arlena, under her real name, or her new one, before the last light of the case faded into darkness again. Confirming that Arlena Kembry Holt had changed her identity forced KBI to widen the search, now focusing on the possibility that the surviving twin had also been taken out of Kansas. Databases of unidentified infants and irregular adoptions from 1995, 1997 were reviewed across multiple states. While most leads went nowhere, a notification from the Colorado State Lab changed everything. A female DNA profile under the name Marin Kepler, born 1995, appeared in a voluntary relative search database. When KBI compared it to the separate infant B genetic profile Parabon had previously isolated, the match was 99.998%, essentially conclusive. Marin Kepler was Marin Holt. The case instantly shifted from no progress possible to concrete target. Colorado civil records showed Marin had been adopted by Graham and Elise Kepler at the end of 1995. However, the adoption had not gone through any full legal process. There was only a vague note that they took in an abandoned infant from an unidentified woman. These details were immediately flagged as highly irregular, because in 1995, every adoption required clear origin paperwork. Handing a child over without documentation strongly suggested someone had deliberately avoided the legal system. Marin Kepler lived in Boulder, Colorado, and worked at a community arts center. When 2 KBI investigators met her, Marin had no idea her life was about to change forever. The initial conversation was gentle until KBI requested a comparison DNA test. When the results came back, they informed her she was a 100% match to a 1995 Kansas missing person case. Marin went silent, her eyes glazing over as if detached from reality. She had always known she was adopted, but had never imagined herself part of an unsolved decades-old case. When she heard the name Arlena Kembry Holt, she just shook her head. The name meant nothing to her. But when she learned she once had an identical twin sister, Marin had to pause a long time before asking, "So what happened to me that night?" KBI needed answers from Graham and Elise Kepler. The Keplers lived in an old wooden house on the edge of Boulder. They greeted the investigators with the weary heaviness of people who had carried a secret far too long. Elise recounted that on a late 1995 evening, a young woman came to their door carrying a newborn girl. The woman was shaking, panicked, and said she could no longer care for the child and begged them to take her. Elise clearly remembered the woman's hands stained with dried blood, her red, exhausted eyes. She had wanted to keep the woman there to help her, but the stranger fled into the night without leaving any papers or name. Graham said they reported it to a local freelance social worker, but the record was cursory and quickly disappeared over time. Both insisted they had no idea the child came from Kansas, no knowledge of any missing person case, and no idea who Arlena Holt was. They truly believed they were simply saving an abandoned baby. However, their description contradicted the assumption that Arlena herself had brought Marin to Colorado. Given the distance, her postpartum condition, and the fact Arlena vanished that same night, the chance she traveled more than 400 miles was practically zero. A critical clue emerged. If Arlena did not bring Marin to the Keplers, then who did? This opened an entirely new investigative branch. What motive would an adult have to pick up Marin from a Kansas field in 1995, drive hundreds of miles, hand her to a stranger's family, and disappear? In the closing notes of the interview, investigator Daryl Kinton wrote, "Finding Marin does not just answer part of the case, it restarts the whole thing." The central question was no longer about the mother's identity. It had become one single question: who took Marin, and what happened to Arlena immediately after she gave birth? The discovery of Marin under the identity Marin Kepler sharply redirected the investigation back toward the mother. KBI concluded to know who took Marin away, they had to find Arlena and determine what had happened to her in the period immediately following the birth. Arlena's civil records stopped dead after February 1995, no movement records, no medical files, no employment reports, a complete disappearance highly unusual for a young woman. This forced KBI to work backward through every federal data thread and the smallest trace Arlena might have left over the past 25 years. Investigator Rowan Maddox, already famous for tracking people who deliberately erased their identities, was put in charge. He began screening every new ID issued after 1996 in neighboring states. Records with birth dates close to Arlena's but no parental data were flagged for review. Most were legitimate, but one record in Missouri made Maddox pause. The woman was named Ariana L. Cross, listed place of birth as unknown, and had applied for a new ID in late 1996 with an affidavit claiming total loss of all personal documents. The application date fell exactly 1 year after Arlena vanished. The handwriting sample in the Cross file showed similarities to Arlena's handwriting from her Kansas days, not conclusive, but enough to move the file to the deep dive list. Maddox widened the net. He pulled church records, since many people changing identities seek refuge in small religious communities to stay off the radar. Sure enough, the 1998 membership roll of a small church in Springfield, Missouri, listed an A. Cross of matching age who attended a few prayer meetings and then disappeared from the roster after 3 months. Next came hospital records. Women who give birth in dangerous circumstances often leave medical traces, even brief ones. After days of cross-checking, Maddox located a 2001 treatment record in Kansas City. A woman listed as Ariana L., treated for skin wounds, refused to give a last name or address. Doctor's note: patient showed signs of anxiety, reacted strongly when family was mentioned. The pieces began to connect. A woman matching Arlena's age, timeline, behavior and travel pattern appeared sporadically across 3 states over 8 years. She never stayed long anywhere, never used any identity consistently, and avoided authorities. It painted the picture of someone haunted by the past, trying to sever every link that could drag her back. Maddox dug into old transaction data. A 2004 bank card purchase in Oklahoma appeared under a cross at a small store, odd because records showed that card should belong to someone who reported all documents lost in 1997. No one had traced it at the time, but with fresh data, KBI saw the pattern clearly. Arlena was living underground under a new name, staying quiet but not completely disconnected from the world. Following the phone number used to open that card, Maddox located an old motel on the outskirts of Tulsa. The owner still had the register and remembered a young woman who spoke little, flinched at loud noises, and often bolted upright at night. She left in 2006, abandoning a few worthless belongings. Soon after, a voluntary medical screening record surfaced in the federal system from Arkansas, a woman listed as Ariane C., with Arlena's exact birth date. Maddox and the team immediately narrowed the area. The record noted the patient lived in a mobile home about 20 minutes outside Fayetteville. The task force moved in. The mobile home sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by silence broken only by wind rattling through old trees. When Maddox knocked, it took a long time before very light footsteps sounded inside. The door opened just a crack. The woman standing there was thin, hair disheveled, eyes wary, face bearing undeniable similarities. It was Arlena Kembry Holt. When Maddox said her name, she stepped back, hands gripping the door as if acknowledging it would make everything collapse. She didn't ask how they found her. She didn't deny it. Arlena's eyes were both panicked and exhausted, as if she had been running for 25 years and had no strength left. KBI had finally found the mother, but what Arlena would, or would not, say next would decide the entire direction of the investigation. After contacting Arlena but unable to obtain a full statement, KBI shifted to its second strategy, modern forensic reconstruction, using every piece of data collected since 1995. If Arlena could not or would not speak, the scene would speak for her. KBI's forensic team returned to the old field in Sedgwick County with the original trace map, crime scene photos, stored soil samples, and a new 3D model built from current technology. What was once wasteland had changed, but the truth lay in the unchanging data. Blood patterns, footprints, placenta location, wind direction that night, and the spot where Elowen was found. First, experts re-examined the blood spatter blurred by wind and mud in the 1995 records. When reconstructed to scale, they saw an adult blood trail stretching from near the tree base to the dirt road, consistent with Arlena bleeding heavily after birth and moving while physically exhausted. The wide smear pattern showed the mother had sat or collapsed multiple times, tried to stand, then fell again. Nearby were chaotic footprints, 2 sets of faint newborn prints, and 1 set of adult prints staggering, all heading toward the dirt road, none returning to the birth site. Forensics confirmed Arlena had tried to carry both babies away from the depression, proving she did not abandon them, but was seeking help. Near the placenta discovery site, the team identified an old ground depression in the original photos, a classic sign of an outdoor birth. The placenta and adult blood were about 3 meters apart, consistent with Arlena moving immediately after delivery, possibly in panic or due to the unexpected arrival of the second baby. From the traces, the forensic team built the first timeline that fit all data logically. Arlena went into sudden labor while walking along the dirt road. She had no idea she was carrying twins, leading to panic after the first baby was born. When the second baby was born in sub-zero temperatures, Arlena lost significant blood and began to weaken. She held both babies and tried to reach help, but the cold rapidly endangered all 3. Elowen died first from hypothermia at the spot where she was found. Marin, smaller and weaker, slipped from Arlena's arms as she staggered away from the depression. A third person arrived, found Marin still alive, and removed the child from the scene. There is no evidence Arlena witnessed this. KBI paid special attention to the final detail. At the moment Marin was taken, there were no footprints from Arlena in that direction. This proved she had no idea what happened after the baby slipped from her grasp. Using wind direction, blood freezing rate, and 1995 snowfall depth from meteorological archives, experts determined the interval from birth to Marin being carried away was no more than 40 minutes. That extremely short window explained why Arlena, already in shock, bleeding and hypothermic, could not react or fully comprehend. And here was the reconstruction's most critical conclusion: Arlena was not the person who carried Marin away. Another adult had been present at the scene that night. The finding went straight into the investigative report. Had no one taken Marin, the baby could not have survived hours in sub-zero cold. This matched the Kepler's account of receiving a child from a young woman, panicked, hands still bloody, possibly Arlena herself or the third party. Forensics flagged a trail more than 60 meters from the placenta, leading toward the main road where black pickup tire tracks had previously been noted. While not directly linking the truck, confirming a third person's presence changed everything. KBI now had the first piece of the puzzle. Arlena gave birth, panicked, tried to flee, then lost track of Marin without ever knowing who took her. The rest of the truth waited with whoever appeared during that fateful 40-minute window. After the reconstruction, KBI returned to Fayetteville for Arlena's formal statement. No longer approaching her as a suspect, they now treated her as the only living witness to that fateful winter night. Rowan Maddox sat across from Arlena in the small room, dim yellow light falling on her gaunt face. No handcuffs, no pressure, only silence heavy enough to suffocate. Maddox gently set a glass of water on the table and told her they had found Marin. The words made Arlena's shoulders freeze. She clenched her hands as if part of her body was waiting to shatter. Only after a long moment did she gather enough breath to speak. The first thing Arlena said, "I didn't kill my baby." She said it softly but clearly enough that it never needed repeating. Maddox did not push. He let her open the memories she had buried for over 2 decades. For the first time, every forensic piece found its explanation. Arlena said that night, she left the house because of intense abdominal pain. She thought it was just normal late pregnancy discomfort. She had no idea she was carrying twins. When the pain turned into labor, she staggered along the dirt road, trying to find a light or any house still awake. She clearly remembered the first sensation, alone in the dark, wind cutting through her skin, a newborn baby in her arms. She panicked because no one was there to help, blood soaking her clothes, breath coming in gasps mixed with the biting cold. And then, just when she thought the worst was over, the second baby was born right on the frozen ground, something she never expected. When Maddox asked if she remembered dropping Marin, Arlena trembled. "I didn't know which baby I was holding at that point. I just remember I didn't have strength left." She described getting to her feet with both babies in her arms, managing only a few meters before her body started going numb. Everything blurred, wind drowned out the crying. She thought she was about to pass out, and right then a man appeared from the direction of the main road. Arlena said he wore a dark coat, walked up and asked if she needed help. His voice was calm, but she was too cold and too exhausted to register anything else. The man bent down and picked up one of the babies, according to Arlena, most likely Marin, because she remembered that one still moving weakly. When Maddox asked why she had never told this before, Arlena lowered her face as if struck by an invisible blow. "I was too panicked. I was terrified if I said anything, they would think I abandoned my babies." She said the man told her he would go get help, and she believed him. In the few seconds she turned away, wind howling, snow flying, the man and the baby vanished from her sight. Arlena could not remember which direction he went. She tried to stand, but her whole body was frozen, her mind spinning. She was left holding only one baby, alone. Arlena took a few more steps, then collapsed near where the body was found the next day. Maddox asked the most crucial question, "Did you get a clear look at the man's face?" Arlena gave a small nod, as if what she was about to say was something she had clutched for half her life. "He was close to 40, dark hair, mustache, thick coat, deep-set eyes. I remember clearly, because he was the only person besides me who ever touched my child." The description matched the forensics: black pickup tire tracks on the dirt road, trail with adult footprints, moving opposite to Arlena's path. Evidence that Marin was removed from the scene by someone other than Arlena. Everything lined up. For the first time in 25 years, the mother's account perfectly matched the forensic evidence. When Maddox showed her the composite sketch, based on her description, Arlena stared at it for a long time. No tears, no screaming, just a long silence, the kind only seen in someone exhausted after years on the run. When she finally looked up, she said one sentence that opened a new door for the investigation. "He knew I was weak. He knew I had just given birth, and he took Marin without another word. He was not a random passerby." In the closing report of the interview, Maddox wrote, "The mysterious male subject is now confirmed. Case direction shifted. Identify the person and motive of the individual who removed Marin from the scene." The truth was no longer standing still. It was racing forward, faster than ever. The description Arlena gave of the mysterious man helped KBI narrow the suspect pool, but it still wasn't enough to identify him. The breakthrough came when the Colorado Forensics Lab sent an additional report about an old item Marin Kepler had kept in her newborn keepsake box, a small, carefully folded piece of faded blanket fiber. The Kepler family said the scrap had been with Marin since the day they took her in, and they always assumed it came from some medical facility. KBI immediately obtained a warrant for collection and analysis. Among the decades-old skin cells trapped in the fabric, forensics recovered a preserved male DNA profile, protected by proteins frozen since 1995. When it was run against the new reference samples collected from the Holt relatives for genetic genealogy comparison, the results stopped the entire investigation team in its tracks. The male DNA was a perfect match to one person, Cassian Holt, Arlena's biological older brother. KBI's first reaction wasn't shock. It was an eerie emptiness. For years the Holt family had believed Arlena disappeared with her baby, or died out in that frozen field. No one had ever suspected Cassian, the quiet, steady eldest son who had always been the family's rock. Investigators re-examined every piece of data. Cassian lived less than 3 miles from the scene. He owned a dark-colored pickup truck in 1995. He had left the house the night Arlena vanished, saying he was going to look for his sister. No one could account for his movements during the critical 40-minute window identified by forensics. With DNA evidence in hand, KBI obtained an arrest warrant the same night. The tactical team approached Cassian's home in El Dorado, where he had lived alone for years doing small engine repair. Cassian opened the door when they knocked. One look at his face, and Maddox knew he understood why they were there. There was no resistance. He sat down on the porch steps, hands hanging limp, as if shoulders that had carried tension for 25 years finally collapsed. In the interview room, Cassian's statement aligned almost perfectly with both the forensic reconstruction and Arlena's account, so perfectly that the case seemed to reassemble itself in front of the investigators. He said that night, he had gone looking for Arlena on instinct. She had been unstable for weeks, but the family never imagined she was about to give birth, let alone to twins. He drove the dirt roads to the field where he had seen her walking before. When he found her, Arlena was incoherent, shaking, exhausted, clutching 2 babies, unaware of her surroundings. He tried to calm her, but she was too far gone to hear him. According to Cassian, Marin slipped from Arlena's arms as she staggered. He picked the baby up and saw she was still breathing weakly. He panicked, faced with 2 crises at once, one infant in critical condition, and a mother in full psychotic shock. When Maddox asked why he didn't call 911, or take all 3 to a hospital, Cassian stared at the floor for a long time. "I thought they would take the babies away from Arlena. I thought I was saving her," he said when he saw Arlena collapse beside Aloan, who was already cold and stiff. He believed she had completely lost touch with reality. In that moment of panic, he put Marin in the truck, started the engine, and drove away, intending to find a clinic. But the farther he drove, the more terrified he became that telling the truth would destroy his sister. Cassian drove through the night into Colorado, and left the baby with the Keplers' old high school friends. He begged them to raise her and never look for her origins. Elise Kepler later confirmed this to KBI. When asked why he stayed silent all these years, Cassian gave only one sentence. "Once I let Marin leave my hands that night, I could never take it back." Cassian was arrested and charged with concealing information regarding a death, illegal interference with child custody, failure to report an infant in medical danger. He also faces potential liability for the 25 years Arlena was listed as missing. When the arrest became public, Sedgwick County reeled. The eldest Holt son, the friendly neighbor, the guy who fixed everyone's lawnmowers, was the man who carried one of the twins away from the field and left a void that lasted half a lifetime. Cassian insisted he never meant to hurt anyone. But the truth was no longer about intent, it was about consequences. And after 25 years, those consequences finally caught up with him. After Cassian Holt's arrest, the preliminary trial was scheduled at the Sedgwick County Courthouse, presided over by Judge Malcolm Renshaw, known for running airtight, by-the-book proceedings in high-profile cold cases. The large, brightly lit courtroom felt heavy. This was the first time in 25 years the full truth of that winter night in 1995 would be spoken in public. Cassian entered in an orange prison jumpsuit, exhausted but compliant. He did not plead guilty, but did not deny the acts. His attorney argued he had acted in panic, without malicious intent, genuinely believing he was saving Marin. The jury of 12 was asked to decide three main issues: concealment and illegal transfer of a child, obstruction of the investigation into the death of infant A. Aloan Holt, whether Cassian's actions reduced the chances of saving both infants. The prosecution argued that regardless of intent, failing to call 911, leaving the scene, and removing Marin directly eliminated any chance of saving Aloan. Forensic experts testified that emergency services arriving within 10-15 minutes could have saved her. A large screen displayed a 3D reconstruction of blood patterns, footprints, and Cassian's path away from the field. The prosecutor drove the point home. He carried away a living baby and left a dying one behind. While murder was not charged, abandoning an infant in sub-zero conditions was presented as serious criminal endangerment. When Arlena took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She walked slowly to the witness box, thin, eyes hollow from decades of trauma. She testified as a witness, not a defendant. Her voice trembled but remained clear. "I didn't know Marin had been taken. I was out of my mind. I thought Cassian was helping." Her account matched the forensic timeline and Cassian's confession. When asked if she believed Cassian meant harm, she paused, then said, "I think he was scared for me." But he was wrong. That statement was recorded as one of the trial's defining moments. It neither excused nor condemned. It simply placed Cassian's actions in their true context, a panicked decision with tragic results. The defense argued Cassian had no bad motive, and that delivering Marin to the Keplers saved her life immediately. Medical reports showed Marin was in mild respiratory distress when found, and might not have survived without prompt care. The prosecution countered with a clear legal principle: a positive outcome does not erase the criminal nature of the act. In closing, the state emphasized that Cassian left one infant to die, hid the truth, and forced the Holt family to search for 25 years. That silence, they argued, could not be dismissed as mere mistake. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Verdict: Cassian Holt was found guilty on the two main charges: child concealment and obstruction causing risk of death. He was not convicted of direct responsibility for Aloan's death, but was sentenced to 7 years in Kansas State Prison. As Judge Renshaw read the sentence, Cassian closed his eyes and bowed his head. No reaction, no protest, just a man finally setting down a 25-year burden. Arlena stared at the floor. In the back row, Marin quietly watched the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life, and never told the truth. The trial ended, but its echoes would linger, because sometimes the truth does not end with a villain, only with a terrible choice finally exposed in the light of justice. Cassian Holt's sentence closed the case legally, but the aftershocks rippled across Kansas like a delayed earthquake. The people of Sedgwick County, who once taped up missing child flyers in 1995 and heard about an infant found frozen in a field, now had to face the fact that the answer had lived among them for 25 years, hidden by fear, silence, and the limits of old investigative tools. Local newspapers ran editorials calling it one of the longest-running and most heartbreaking cold cases in Kansas history. Many expressed shock that the person who took Marin was not a stranger, but the victim's own brother, someone they had trusted. The community split. Some felt sympathy, others outrage, but most felt unsettled by how thin the line can be between an impulsive act and devastating legal consequences. From that intense public reaction, a grassroots movement was born. Media and child advocacy groups proposed the Holt Kepler Fund, a program to provide funding and technology for investigations into missing or unidentified newborns. The fund helps small police departments access modern DNA tools, especially mixed DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, the very techniques that cracked the Holt twins case. The Kepler family, though dragged into the story unwillingly, agreed to lend their name as a reminder that Marin's life was saved by unconditional kindness, even if it arose from tragic circumstances. At a press conference, Elise Kepler said, "No child should live half their life not knowing who they are." The statement brought donations from across the country. For Marin herself, life changed completely in a matter of months. She was no longer just a community artist in Boulder. She became a symbol of forensic persistence, while facing the tense reality of living two lives, one peaceful as a Kepler, the other fractured as a Holt. Marin began intensive therapy to integrate her true identity. She met the Holt family in supervised sessions, not out of obligation, but to understand her roots. Many nights she told her therapist she felt like two people in one body, trying to balance gratitude with bitterness. Yet what kept her strong was knowing she survived, and her story helped solve the case and protect future children from being forgotten. KBI treated the Holt case as a major lesson in past investigative failures and the power of modern technology. Immediately after closure, they announced a full review of all infant-related cold cases from the 1980s, 2000s. New methods allowed them to re-examine samples once deemed unusable, and within 6 months 3 additional Wichita-area cold cases were reopened with promising leads. Legally, the case prompted Kansas to update statutes on abandoned infants, mandating reporting and better medical record tracing. Both healthcare and law enforcement received new training on recognizing signs of unplanned births, a topic largely ignored in the 1990s. Public faith in forensics soared. People began to understand that decades-old cases could still be solved when evidence is preserved and re-examined with new tools. Wichita State University held a major symposium titled "The Future of Mixed DNA Investigation," using the Holt twins as the flagship example. In Sedgwick County, where it all began, residents erected a small memorial near the field where Elowen was found. It bears both names, Elowen Holt and Marin Holt, with the inscription, "One lost, one found." The truth finally came home. The case's aftermath lives not only in sentences and press conferences, but in how it changed the way people view community responsibility, the power of science, and the cost of silence. And though the Holt story is steeped in tragedy, it left a lasting legacy, the belief that even in the deepest cold cases justice can still arrive, if we keep trying and never give up. In the 1995 Kansas story, the deepest pain is not only that Elowen died of exposure, or that Marin grew up under another name, but the chain of well-meaning choices that people truly believed were the right thing. Cassian carried Marin away from the snowy field, handed her to the Keplers believing he was saving his niece, yet stayed silent for 25 years, never calling police, never telling anyone the truth. That silence turned an act of rescue into concealment, obstruction and decades of hell for the Holt family. In today's America, with safe haven laws that let you surrender a newborn at hospitals, fire stations, or churches with no questions asked, with 911 available 24/7, with support networks for mental health, the story of Arlena and Cassian is a reminder: never try to handle alone a crisis that is bigger than you. Arlena, panicked, ashamed, and terrified of judgment, didn't report or go to a hospital. Cassian, afraid his sister would lose her children, and afraid of the system, hid Marin instead of trusting official help. The result: one baby dead, one raised with a split identity, and one man paying the price in court near the end of his life. On the other hand, the case was solved only because forensics preserved DNA from Eloin's diaper and Marin's old blanket scrap, combined with modern genetic genealogy. It proves that evidence, no matter how small, matters, and cooperating with authorities is always better than hiding to keep the peace. The real-world lesson for life in America today: when facing crisis, unplanned pregnancy, domestic violence, an infant in danger, reach out to the support system. 911, hospital, counselor, attorney, church, shelter, instead of staying silent or deciding alone in the dark. Good intentions cannot fix a wrong choice. Only transparency and asking for help can prevent another real-life Holt family tragedy. Thank you for joining me on this painful but necessary 25-year journey to the truth. If you want to keep following cold cases cracked open by justice and technology, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring cases everyone thought time had buried, but that finally found their voice through truth.